Captain Dunbar Ransom was the acting chief of artillery for the 1st Corps of the Army of the Potomac. Ransom was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina in 1831. His father, Colonel Truman Ransom, was an educator at Norwich College. The Ransom family moved to Norwich when Dunbar was 1 year old. Ransom went to West Point in 1847, but he didn't graduate. In 1850, he resigned. He had academic challenges. And I think part of it was his father was killed in the Mexican War, and that had something to do with, where his head was at. So he goes back to Norwich and finishes his education there. And for several years, he was an engineer with his brother and Grenville Dodge, who you may know about, another fairly important Civil War guy. In 1855, he got an appointment to the 3rd United States Artillery and served on the Pacific Coast. The 3rd Artillery was stationed out there primarily. For several years, he fought in several of the Indian campaigns in Washington State. Then he went to Minnesota and was there for a year before the Civil War started. So Ransom's battery, regular Army battery, came east when the call for the soldiers and batteries was made out of Washington in July of '61. He fought at the Battle of Bull Run, and he got a reputation there as being a real capable officer. He was still a lieutenant. He then participated in the Port Royal campaign in South Carolina, and he was appointed a captain in the 3rd Artillery. And he was called back to Virginia to the Army of the Potomac and given command of Battery C, 5th United States Artillery, whose Captain DeHart was killed at Gaines Mill. So Ransom takes over Battery C, 5th U.S. Artillery, and also takes over as Chief of Artillery for the Pennsylvania Reserve Division. There were 3 other Pennsylvania batteries there, and then there was the regular battery. That's how they set them up in those days. The battery fought at 2nd Bull Run, credibly, and after 2nd Bull Run, when Joe Hooker was appointed chief of the 1st Corps, he sent for another officer to actually take command of the artillery, his chief of artillery in the 3rd Corps when he was down there. That officer was not able to get here in time for the Battle of Antietam, so Hooker put Ransom in charge. He was one of the few regular officers in the 1st Corps. He had a good reputation. He'd proven himself in 2 previous campaigns in the Civil War and had a good pre-war career as an artillerist. So Ransom is in the 1st Corps. The 1st Corps is located in the North Woods. They came on the field the night before with Meade's division and actually were engaged in some artillery fighting that night. The next morning, Hooker will bring Ransom's battery forward out of the North Woods to the high ground north of the cornfield. And this battery will significantly be responsible for the repulse of Hood's division and also of Ripley's brigade of D.H. Hill's division. The battery will be decimated. It'll lose almost all its horses that were pulling the guns. A large number of soldiers are killed or wounded, and it'll be pulled back into the North Woods to refit. And they'll basically switch over the horses that were on the caissons so that the battery could move guns again. At that point, he's going to report to General Meade, and Meade will tell him to find General Hooker and accompany General Hooker in posting the other batteries of the 1st Corps. The 1st Corps had 9 batteries, 44 guns. So for the rest of the morning, he will be with Joe Hooker as they're posting batteries and pushing those batteries further and further south. Ransom will be with Hooker when he's wounded, when they were posting Monroe's battery and Edgel's battery on the Dunker Church Plateau. And then he'll report to General Meade, who's now taking command of the Corps. He will stay with Meade for the rest of the day. Meade, if I may, I want to just read a quote that Meade wrote about Ransom's actions at Antietam. I think it's really important. He says, "I call your attention to the skill and good judgment combined with the coolness with which Captain Ransom and his officers and men served the battery. I have described the advance of the enemy through the cornfield," and here he's talking about Hood's division, "and the check the column received from Captain Ransom's fire. I consider this one of the most critical periods of the morning, and to Ransom's battery is due the great credit of repulsing the enemy." So George Meade thinks a lot of Ransom After the battle at Antietam, he will stay with his battery and fight with the Pennsylvania Reserve Division at Fredericksburg and at Chancellorsville. And then at Gettysburg, he's going to be promoted to command the 1st Regular Brigade of Artillery, a new initiative that Henry Hunt made where he basically starts to consolidate the batteries. So Ransom gets command of the 1st Regular Artillery Brigade of the Artillery Reserve at Gettysburg. He's seriously wounded in the thigh, and then he's out of action for a while. And he doesn't come back until 1864. And now he's gone back to the 3rd Artillery. He takes his old company back in the 3rd Artillery. He's out of the 5th. And he accompanies Phil Sheridan in the campaigns against Jubal Early in 1864. He will end the war with 3 brevets for gallantry, one for Fredericksburg, one for Chancellorsville, and one for Kearneysville. Interestingly, he didn't get one for Antietam, and I'm not sure why that is. He will stay in the regular army after the war. He's got 3 brevets, so he's technically can be referred to as Colonel Ransom, but he's still only a battery commander. And then he'll hit a rough patch in his career. In 1872, he will face a court-martial where he is charged with borrowing money from an enlisted man. In those days, you couldn't do that. It's kind of a weak charge, but he's found guilty anyway and cashiered out of the Army. And for about 24 years, like some other Civil War officers who try to regain their reputations after the Civil War, he's trying to get his reputation reestablished. His good old friend Grenville Dodge, who he worked with before the war, by now is a fairly powerful political figure, a Civil War general, moves in high places, and a bill appears before Congress to exonerate Ransom of the charges from that 1872 court-martial conviction. Congress approves that bill. He's restored to the retired list in 1894, and he dies in 1897 in Texas at the age of 66, I believe. I think Ransom is one of these artillery officers, like many, who never have received the attention that they really deserved. He's a brave soldier. His men respect him. He contributes significantly at Antietam, at Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg, and then with Sheridan later on. And he has an honorable and important military career. So I hope when you read the commanders of Antietam and you look at some of these artillery officers here, you'll get a new respect for the important role that they played in the Battle of Antietam.